Welcome back to the deep dive. There's this enduring fascination, maybe even unease, with historical figures who just cause these massive cataclysmic shifts.
Absolutely. And we often think we have the story down, don't we? The clear villain, the person who never wavered.
Exactly. But what if those really powerful stories, the ones everyone knows, are actually built on, well, myth? What if the real person underneath was way more complicated, maybe contradictory, even shocking?
That's precisely what we're digging into today.
Right. So our mission here is to sort of peel back the layers on one particularly infamous figure, someone who really, really carefully built this powerful public image. We want to reveal the actual person underneath all that.
And the goal isn't judgment, not mocking or lamenting, as Spinoza might say. It's about understanding, especially when someone's real life was just so different from the persona they projected.
And we've got some great resources to help us do that, right? Historical accounts, some pretty deep psychoanalytic takes, biographical essays.
A really rich mix, yeah. Lots to work with to find those crucial bits of insight.
Okay, let's unpack this then. So right off the bat, what's the biggest clash? The public image versus what the sources say was the reality.
Well, it's a pretty stunning contrast, actually. It starts with his basic character. Most people picture this guy, rock solid convictions, anti-Semitic basically from birth, strict vegetarian, teetotaler, always true to his supposed principles.
That's the standard picture, yeah.
That's the image he wanted us to see, meticulously crafted. But the reality, according to these sources, it's just jarringly different.
How so?
For starters, he was deeply opportunistic, a pragmatic politician, sure, but also corrupt. He stole, he evaded taxes, and get this, bribery was apparently his main tool for buying loyalty.
Bribery? Seriously?
Yeah.
That completely flips the script on the principled ideologue idea.
It really does. It suggests his power wasn't just ideology, it was built on, well, transactional corruption.
That's staggering. Okay, what about the anti-Semitism? Because the story is always that he hated Jews from day one.
Right, and that's another huge point the sources dismantle. He didn't actually become anti-Semitic until he was a mature adult. We're talking age 30, around 1919.
30, not as a kid.
No, and before that, some sources suggest he was even considered a philosemite, someone who liked or admired Jews. It's a total reversal of the common narrative.
Wow. Okay, the contradictions are just piling up. What about his personal habits? The whole vegetarian teetotaler thing?
Yeah, not quite. He enjoyed meat, apparently especially game, and he drank beer and wine pretty regularly. And far from being some health nut, he was a major hypochondriac.
Hypochondriac.
Yes, and ironically, he kept a prominent Jewish oncologist, a Dr. Warburg, close by because he valued his expertise for his own health worries.
So the health-conscious image was also constructed. Where does it get really deep, personally speaking, according to the sources?
Here's where it gets really interesting, as you say. He was apparently a chronic drug user, addicted to psychotropic stuff like cocaine and even crystal meth.
Whoa, hold on. Cocaine and meth, regularly.
Uninterruptedly, the sources say, from late 1936 onwards. And maybe the most revealing thing about his personality, he was his own biggest fan. Off the charts, narcissism.
How so?
Described as the highest priest of his own personality cult. Genuinely believed he was the greatest person who ever lived. This wasn't just ego, it shaped everything, made him ignore advice, fueled this delusion of infallibility.
That level of narcissism, it connects to what some sources label him, doesn't it? They mention psychopathy.
They do. And what's fascinating here is how deep these traits seem to run. Psychopathy, as the sources lay it out, involves this profound lack of empathy, no remorse, shallow feelings, but often being verbally slick, good at manipulation, and just callous.
And he ticked all those boxes.
According to the research, yes. He clearly exhibited those traits. The description fits.
So if these traits were so fundamental, where do the sources suggest they came from? Does it go back to his childhood?
It seems to. The research points right back to his earliest days. His mother, she'd lost 3 children just in the 2 years before he was born. Imagine that environment. Death was at home, as one historian put it.
That's incredibly bleak.
Yeah. And she was grieving deeply, didn't get emotional support from her husband, who was much older and alcoholic. So she provided what's called minimum service care for the new baby.
Meaning?
Fed him, clothed him, basic needs met. But no real love, no emotional connection. Psychoanalysts like Bowlby talk about maternal deprivation, spits about hospitalism. It can lead to kids who are emotionally underdeveloped who can't really bond. Longridge noted his obvious lack of feelings toward others.
But then things changed, right? When he was about 6.
Exactly. It gets really complicated. Around age 6, she realizes he's healthy, he's likely going to survive. and her behavior apparently just flips 180 degrees. Maybe guilt-driven, who knows. But she suddenly becomes extremely overprotective, trying to make up for the earlier lack of affection, perhaps.
So you have this really strange combination. Early neglect, followed by intense, maybe smothering attention later on. What did that do to his personality, psychologically?
The sources suggest this strange combination was key. Early deprivation, then this exaggerated love in puberty. It seems to have forged a personality where the core trait is this chilling mix. Callousness towards others with an exaggerated love of himself. Self-centeredness baked in early, then amplified.
Wow. You know, it's pretty wild to think how that deep psychology might show up in everyday things, like his attempt to be an artist. How did that play out?
Right, his artistic ambitions. He tried twice for the Vienna Academy of Arts, ages 18 and 19, failed both times, and the reasons connect back to this potential psychopathy.
How so?
Well, Professor 𝗽𝗲𝗿𝘀cie, after the first failure in 1907, specifically noted his paintings lacked heads, 𝗽𝗲𝗿𝘀cie HS, and the director, 𝗽𝗲𝗿𝘀, told him a human touch was missing. His pictures focused on buildings, landscapes. They just weren't alive.
And that connects to psychopathy how?
It mirrors a known trait seen in Rorschach inkblot tests. Psychopaths apparently very seldom find human figures in the ambiguous shapes. It suggests there's a fundamental difficulty connecting with or representing the human element.
So art wasn't his path. Architecture maybe, but he didn't have the diploma for that.
Exactly. Which raises another important point about the stories we tell ourselves about him. Maybe the biggest myth is the idea that his anti-Semitism was there from the start.
Right, the youth anti-Semitism you said earlier that's challenged by the sources. How did that story even start?
Well, the sources argue it's a myth he basically invented himself, writing it into Mein Kampf back in 1923. And many respected biographers, Bullock, Fest, Kershaw, they largely took him at his word on that.
So they repeated his version.
Seems so. Sebastian Haffner had this great quote saying it was like he carried it around like a congenital hump. But the truth, according to these analyses, is he only became anti-Semitic much later, 1919, age 30, after the German revolutions collapsed.
Okay, so if that's a myth, what's the evidence he wasn't anti-Semitic before 1919? You mentioned Dr. Bloch, his family doctor.
Right. Dr. Bloch, who is Jewish. The story that he hated Bloch because of his mother's treatment doesn't hold up. He never complained, kept a good relationship with Bloch after his mother died. Bloch himself was apparently surprised and shocked later in 1922 when he heard about the anti-Semitism.
And didn't you say he actually protected Bloch later on?
He did. After the Anschluss, when Austria was annexed, he made sure Bloch and his family were safe from persecution. They were apparently the only Jews to enjoy such an advantage.
That's incredibly contradictory. What happened to Bloch?
He and his family managed to emigrate to the U.S. in 1940 with all their assets. Bloch died there in 1945, just about a month after his former patient's son, his protector, died. Bloch later said if he'd known about the anti-Semitism earlier, he never would have, supported him or recommended him.
So it suggests a weird sort of pragmatism, or maybe just inconsistency even in his later actions. What about other areas? Culture, business dealings as a young man.
Yeah, plenty there too. His big passion as a young man was opera. That was like his substitute university education. Spent his inheritance on tickets. And according to his friend Kubitschek, sure, he liked German opera, but if the choice was between French-Italian opera and one by a German Jew, he'd pick the one by the Jewish composer.
Really? Like who?
He defended Gustav Mahler, the Jewish conductor, back in 1908 against anti-Semitic attacks, calling him the best interpreter of Wagner. He apparently admired Mendelssohn, Offenbach too, and when he was a struggling artist in Vienna...
Selling paintings.
Trying to, yeah.
Yeah.
He sold the few he managed primarily through Jewish middlemen, frame dealers like Altenburg and Morgenstern. He even preferred selling to Jewish traders sometimes, befriended his Jewish roommate, Joseph Neumann, who helped him out.
So he was interacting closely with Jewish people.
Absolutely. Brigitte Hammond's research shows he maintained good relations with many other Jews and even benefited from Jewish charities helping homeless youth. Someone who knew him in a homeless shelter back then, or Hanush, recalled him talking critically about anti-Semitism and positively about Judaism.
So people who were actually anti-Semitic back then saw him differently.
Yeah, they considered him a philosemite. They found his sudden turnaround in 1919 really hard to grasp.
Okay, and World War I.
Yeah.
What about his military service? You mentioned Lieutenant Gutman.
Right. He was a dispatch runner, pretty brave apparently, rode a bicycle, dodged bullets, lived in barracks, not the trenches, so he had time to read, draw, paint, even had a dog. And his lieutenant, Hugo Gutman, who was Jewish, is the one who got him his Iron Cross First Class.
The medal he always wore, Gutman got him that.
Yes. Gutman tried to get him promoted multiple times, but the higher-ups always said no. They felt he had no charisma, wasn't respected by the other soldiers, had a careless attitude, wasn't really military material.
But Gutman still have some connection later.
Amazingly, yes. Gutman kept getting his war veterans pension after 1933, apparently thanks to letters sent on his behalf. He was even arrested briefly by the Gestapo in 1938, but released quickly because of his known connection to the Fuhrer. Gutman got out to the U.S. in 1940.
And yet, later on, the man Gutman turns around and calls him a coward.
In a 1941 monologue, yes, just dismissed him. But during the war itself, sources say he never had problems with Jewish soldiers in his regiment.
Okay, so 1919 is clearly the pivot. If he wasn't driven by lifelong hatred, what was driving him right after the war ended?
Survival, mostly. His number one goal, according to historian Ulrich, was just to stay in the army. Anything to avoid going back to that destitute, homeless existence he had before the war. The barracks felt like home.
So he needed to find a way to stay in. And the political situation was chaotic, right?
Very. Germany was in revolution. She had choices. Get demobilized, join a right-wing militia, or stay in the army, which now served the new revolutionary government in Bavaria. He chose to stay in the army.
Serving the revolution. Why?
Purely material considerations, the sources argue. Free room and board, monthly pay. He effectively joined what some critics called the Bolshevik soldiers. He was defending a regime he'd later claim he always hated.
And this regime had Jewish leaders, you mentioned?
Yes, especially non-Bavarian Jews were prominent, which fueled anti-Semitic attacks against it. And in the middle of this, April 1919, he gets elected spokesman for his unit. His first taste of leadership.
Why would they elect him?
Probably an opportunistic move on his part to seem indispensable, avoid getting kicked out. He started making speeches for the government, acting as a propaganda liaison. Some people thought he was an SPD militant, a social democrat. He even wore the red armband of the Soviet Republic.
Total chameleon. But then that revolutionary government fell, right? So he was on the losing side. How did he flip again?
Instantly. The Soviet Republic is crushed. He's suddenly vulnerable, could be arrested as a leftist. His solution. He immediately goes to the new rulers, the counter-revolutionaries, and offers himself up as an informant.
Informing on his former comrades.
Exactly. Testified against guys from his own regiment, the ones who had elected him spokesman just a month before. It kept him safe, kept him in the military. Munich was apparently crawling with opportunists like him, then swarmed with chameleons.
And this is when the shift really happens, the radicalization.
Yes. This informing, plus taking a military propaganda course on anti-Bolshevism, his first real political training, that was the starting point of his politicization and radicalization.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, why was Munich in 1919 the perfect place for someone like him to suddenly embrace radical anti-Semitism?
It was the absolute perfect storm. He became an anti-Semite in, as the sources put it, the best time and best place where being anti-Semitic was the best asset for a politician. Post-revolution Munich was the world capital of anti-Semitism.
The world capital.
That's the term used. There was anti-Semitic mass hysteria, a pogrom mood. Ulrich and Brenner call it ideal conditions. His transformation wasn't some deep-seated thing finally emerging. It looks like pure opportunism and purposeful thinking. The demand for anti-Semitic speakers and agitators was sky high. He just stepped in to fill the demand.
So he adopts this ideology out of convenience, basically. But did he stick to it rigidly? Or did the contradictions continue?
Oh, the contradictions definitely continued. He kept bending his own supposed principles whenever it suited him. Like, he banned Mendelssohn's music because Mendelssohn was Jewish. But he loved Johann Strauss, who also had Jewish origins.
Huh. What else?
The Wehrmacht thing is striking. He personally approved thousands of permits, these German-Blitz certificates, for officers and soldiers who had Jewish ancestry. Sources estimate around 150,000 soldiers of mixed Jewish heritage served, and he knew about it.
150,000, and he allowed it.
Seems so. And remember, Dr. Warburg, the Jewish cancer researcher, his hypochondria was apparently stronger than his anti-Semitism. He protected Warburg throughout the Nazi era, let him keep working in Berlin, presumably just in case he needed him.
Pragmatism trumping ideology again. Now, the Holocaust, the Shoah, it's often presented as the inevitable result of German history, of traditional anti-Semitism. Do the sources agree?
Not entirely. Leibovitz argued, and these sources seem to support it, that the Shoah wasn't just a continuation of traditional German anti-Semitism. Earlier anti-Semites, like Paul Lagarde, talked about forced conversion, maybe deporting Jews to Madagascar. Dietrich Eckart even saw Jews as a necessary evil for civilization for thousands more years.
So the idea wasn't always mass murder.
No, most Germans might have been eliminationists wanting Jews out of Germany, out of Europe, but that didn't automatically mean killing them all. The Nazis even worked with Zionist groups for a while because both wanted Jews to emigrate to Palestine. That shared eliminationist goal, oddly enough.
So where did the idea of total extermination come from?
The sources point towards military thinking, specifically General Ludendorff's 1935 book, The Total War. He argued for wiping out entire enemy populations. That kind of thinking seeped in.
That's a chilling connection. The sources also make a point about Nazism being a form of socialism, not fascism. Can you explain that? It sounds counterintuitive.
It does, but the argument is this. Nazism strongly opposed internationalism, both Marxist internationalism and Catholic internationalism. It wasn't about class war like Marxism. It replaced class war with race war, specifically against Jews.
And there was an economic angle to this race war.
Absolutely. 𝗽𝗲𝗿𝘀cie work is key here. The idea was that expropriating the Jews, stealing their property and assets, would pay for the Nazis' populist social welfare programs. It was a way of bribing the German population.
So take from the Jews to give to the Aryans.
Basically, yes. Firing Jews opened up jobs, and they had these completely delusional ideas about how wealthy Jews actually were. Ali and Adam Tooze argue that after years of this kind of spending, the regime was broke. By the late 30s, they saw no other way to cover their deficits than by going to war.
War as an economic necessity, driven by anti-Semitic expropriation. But what about the pure ideology behind the final solution, especially later in the war?
That's where the delusion really kicks in. After France fell quickly in 1940, he expected Britain to make peace. When Churchill refused, his explanation was, the Jews were behind Churchill.
He blamed the Jews for Britain staying in the war.
Yes. And he extended that thinking to Stalin and Roosevelt, too. They were all just puppets, he thought, controlled by this single malevolent Jewish entity pulling the strings worldwide.
That's paranoid conspiracy thinking on a global scale.
Completely. Goebbels wrote in his diary in 1944 about how the Führer believed the Zionist protocols are absolutely authentic, believed Jews operated purely on racial instinct, couldn't be changed or civilized, they'd stay Jews forever. It's deeply delusional.
Okay, we've covered the big political and psychological picture. But what about the day-to-day reality of the man himself? Any more sort of mundane struggles behind the mask?
Oh, definitely. While the public focus was on world domination and Jewish conspiracies, his private concerns were often much more down to earth. Like, sources mention he was plagued by very abundant flatulences.
Flatulence. Seriously.
Yes. Possibly linked to his attempt at a vegetarian diet. Lots of legumes, apparently. And it bothered him immensely because it just didn't fit the image, right? He cultivated these polite, almost Viennese, butler-like manners, but photos often show him looking tense, constipated, maybe trying to control himself.
That's unexpectedly human in a way. How did he deal with it?
He finally found a doctor in 1936, Dr. Morel. Apparently, Morel himself stank like a skunk because he thought washing was unhealthy.
Okay.
But Morel supposedly healed the flatulence problem at a huge cost, though. This is where the serious drug use seems to have started or escalated dramatically.
Morel was prescribing the cocaine and meth.
Among many, many other things, the sources list something like 90 different drugs prescribed, 27 taken daily, including hefty doses of cocaine and methamphetamine, basically nonstop from late 36 until his suicide in 45.
Daily use for almost a decade. What did that do to him?
Physically, it led to what doctors identified as a chronic and progressive iatrogenic Parkinson disorder, basically drug-induced Parkinson's symptoms. It made him look much older, shaky.
And mentally, did it affect his judgment?
That's the big question, isn't it? How much did the constant drug use warp his thinking? We can't know for sure, but it's telling that the Japanese ambassador, who saw him often, noted he was permanently overexcited and felt his judgment should not be trusted. It paints a picture of someone increasingly detached from reality, fueled by drugs.
So what does this all mean at the end of the day? We often think of opportunism and conviction as opposites. You're either a cynical opportunist or a sincere believer. But the sources suggest it's more complicated.
Exactly. They argue that opportunism and conviction can actually go hand in hand. It's not always either.
How does that work?
Well, think about it. Successful opportunism can create conviction. He was apparently very good at sensing what resonated with crowds, which of his remarks were the most applauded. And hearing that applause, getting that validation, it led him to become more and more enthusiastic and in love with the ideas that communicated.
So the positive feedback for his opportunistic statements actually made him believe them more strongly.
That's the argument. It creates this feedback loop, which leads to a really chilling insight. Even though he was often a cynical liar and manipulator, most of his terrible, hideous, and lethal beliefs were sincere.
Wow, that makes him somehow even more terrifying. The opportunism fueled a genuine, twisted conviction.
It does. So that this deep dive, it really shows a figure far more complex, far more contradictory than that simple monolithic image we started with.
Yeah, you see this disturbing mix of early trauma, sheer opportunism, physical problems, drug addiction, and these powerful delusional beliefs all weaving together.
And it really highlights why it's so important to look past the public persona, doesn't it? To try and understand the real motivations, how conviction itself can be fluid and shaped by external factors.
Absolutely, how personal issues and the historical moment can combine with truly devastating results.
So, maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Given how his convictions seemed to harden and become more sincere as they brought him success and applause, how can we today spot when a public figure's stated principles might be shaped more by getting that external validation than by any real internal consistency? And what are the dangers if we can't tell the difference?